All right, Pastor Mark here with my friend, Pastor Mike Signorelli. You are in Gotham. You're in the belly of the beast over in New York. And I want to ask you about the movie, and then I want to get into some leadership stuff. But I want to start by asking how your family's doing. How's your wife? How's your kids? How's your family?
Yeah, well, my family's doing so good. Thanks for having me. Your family really is your resume for ministry. A wise man once told me, and I have the most normal wife in America, and she counterbalances all of my crazy. So
Yeah,
we're doing good.
we love you. I love you guys. And I had the honor of being in your house a couple months ago, and you could tell a lot of guy about a guy how his wife and his kids are around him. And um, there's a non-anxious presence. And
Yeah.
sometimes you go into a home and the husband, the father, he brings an anxious presence. You could see everybody's just a little nervous or uncomfortable. Dude, your girls just take turns sitting on your lap, and your wife is literally just, I told you, she's normal. She's awesome. She's great. You've got a
Yeah.
beautiful family. And to be able to carve out a healthy, loving, unified, joyful family in the middle of a very complicated and sometimes conflicting ministry as you're heading into culture and having the right head-on collisions. I was just really encouraged, and I'm proud of you. And I don't know, it was just really good to see. So oftentimes you meet a guy and he's doing well, but his family isn't.
Yeah.
And ministry starts at home. And if the people with your last name aren't doing good, then something's out of order. So I just wanted to honor you for being a good husband and father. And yeah, and your wife is great, man. Like we were talking, for those of you who are like Pastor Mike and myself, and you're a weirdo, you're an oddball, you're a strange bird. Pastor Jimmy Evans told me one time, he's like, in a marriage, at least one of you needs to be normal for it to work. Well, in our marriage, Grace is normal. Your wife is normal, and praise God, because if there were two of us, it wouldn't be good.
Yeah. It,
So
it's so
what? So
true.
tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now. You've got a movie coming out, massive project. Maybe just kind of give the 10,000-foot overview of what you're working on presently, and then I want to reverse engineer the leadership lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm here in the belly of the beast, as you mentioned, just surrounded by hordes of like woke trans activists that propagating like antichrist infrastructure and demonic doctrines on a daily basis. And somehow in the midst of that, we have a, large and thriving local church that's making disciples that make disciples. And then the pandemic happened, and I had to find a new way. We don't own our buildings. And
Oh
so
man,
I
that's
went on a
catastrophic.
Oh, it was major. And so after a couple of months of trying to figure out what to do, I ended up doing this like national revival tour and said I'll meet people in any park, in the beach, whatever. And so that became the impetus for the Domino Revival. And the idea that I got in prayer was just pushing down one big domino in New York City and saying, if God can do something like what I'm about to show you here, he can surely do it across the US. And then that precipitated to a major movie release, which, I didn't become a pastor thinking that I was going to have a major movie, but God opened a door sovereignly. And here's how I pitched the idea. I told the movie industry exec, I said, I want to do the Avengers Endgame of revival. So I just want to show, giants in the faith, generals, guys that are doing things that, and all kind of own a different definition of what revival is. We're going to bring it all together in one movie. I get an immediate yes. And then I went back and told my team, I'm like, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we have an opportunity to fill almost every movie theater in America. The bad news is we have no idea how to make a movie. So, so as of yesterday, we got back from Toronto. I just want to brag on God. I was raised in a trailer park by a single mom on welfare. That's my story. I just got back from Toronto, where the movie industry is obviously on strike. So as a result of that, the same people behind Star Wars, the new Barbie movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, literally finished this film. And just seeing how Muslims were responding to the gospel from their team, seeing how totally secular people were like interacting with this footage for weeks, and it was having an effect on them, was amazing. So, there's Christian good in the film industry, and then there's whatever this movie is. It's not a perfect movie, but it's going to be a sword in the belly of the beast for sure.
So in that, would you not have been able to get that level of production help were it not for the timing of the strike?
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, it's divine timing because
So the
for
best
me as
guys
a
are
general,
unemployed, and Pastor Mike is like, "Hey, I'm not going on strike. I need to get the gospel out."
yeah, well, the whole movie, as you know, it's like ancient demons, new days. There was a Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and there's going to be another crew just like it today. This movie, I mean, I'm literally in the epicenter of like Babylonian artistic creation, and these guys are using every resource imaginable to get this movie from good to great. And I'm laughing and crying at the same time, saying this is ridiculous. I mean, if I gave you the list of films I've worked on in addition to what I just listed, it runs the gamut from Netflix and series like that all the way to major motion pictures. And they're all working for Jesus right now to get this movie done.
It's great. So, how many theaters are you hoping to be in? What's the primary goal that you're aiming toward? What's your red zone you're hoping to achieve?
Well, yeah, I mean, because we don't have Brad Pitt in this film, and we're just coming out of the gate, we have to unlock new levels. So right now we've already broke the 1,000 barrier. So, which is crazy. I mean, you think about there's how many states there are in the United States, and to already break the 1,000 barrier. And I've been saying each one of these auditoriums are like a tabernacle in the wilderness, because we're really going to be turning this auditorium into a place where people can encounter God. And it's an uncompromised gospel message too. I mean, it's brutal. This is not a seeker-sensitive film. And so we unlocked the 1,000 theater level. I believe we can do 2,000. For us, we're living in the pre-sales world. So it's like that's our evidence that we should unlock more theaters, is that we sell out the pre-existing ones. We blew their mind with the initial sales, and then it kind of leveled off. And then in the last week, we're seeing another bump. So, if you're hearing this right now, let's keep driving this thing.
Yeah. And so if people go to the theater and they watch the film, like, what's the experience going to be? What's the storyline going to be? It sounds like church meets revival meets, deliverance meets popcorn. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I got sucked into the deliverance community. I always considered myself like a ruthless gospel teacher. And wherever the gospel is being declared, you're going to also see healing. You're going to see deliverance and those kinds of things. I spent 2 years with Tim Keller here in New York City, so I thought it was hilarious when I got sucked into the deliverance community. The movie, though, is really like it's a documentary that is pre-pandemic, during, and post-pandemic. And it follows the timeline of multiple people and kind of what God birthed through them, and kind of like movement makers, you being one of them. You threw some knives in this film. I was shouting you down in Toronto and watching you offend everybody into their next level. But the movie really is, it's about the gospel. It's about and how almost like this multifaceted definition. Even when you look at the cast, I intentionally got together the most diverse group I could to complicate it for the heresy hunters, because it's like,
Dude, the pajama hadin, those people, man.
exactly.
Oh gosh, dude. I mean, the least discerning people do discernment ministry, and the least accountable people do accountability ministry. And if they have a blog, they should hook up a breathalyzer to it before they start typing, because the stuff they come up with, dude. I mean,
Yeah.
the QAnon people are like, "Are you kidding me? That's crazy,"
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that was my thing, is like, I don't even agree 100% with everybody in the film, but I did that
Dude, I don't
intentionally.
agree 100% with me.
Right.
I had
Yeah.
somebody, I mean, as a pastor, you learn and grow over time, right?
Yeah.
So like somebody came to me recently, like, "I don't agree with everything you've said." I was like, "Frick, we're friends, man. I don't agree with everything I said today."
It's so true. It's so true. But you know what the thing too is, like, God can't steer a parked car. So it's like he blesses your footprints, not your butt prints. And my thing is, I'm out there doing it. It's like there's literary critics and then there's authors. I'd rather write a book than criticize someone else's. There's food critics and then there's chefs. So
Yeah,
for me,
there's
it's like,
war historians and there's warriors.
come on, I'm gonna steal
The
that
guy in
one.
a cardigan, he may have, his debrief, but at the end of the day, nobody's going to pin a medal on him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what this film is. It's like who's running into the fight, who's looking at the American landscape and saying, we're not going to let you keep redefining right and wrong, and we're going to stand for biblical values no matter what the consequences are. So on the lowest common denominator, we all became friends in a foxhole during the last 3 or 4 years. And that's how I feel about it. And that's really what this movie is. It is going to be the thorn in the side of a lot of comfortable Christians. It's going to be a thorn in the side of a lot of comfortable pastors, because I'm going to provoke people to actually pick a side. And that's really what this film is. It's like,
Yeah.
it's really a mic drop moment on society. And I don't want to give away the film, but it's not about me. I'll say that. The film's not about me. It does chronicle part of my story. I play a part in it. You do as well as others. But it's about passing that baton, and it's about taking a side.
So would you agree today, sounds like this is where you're going, that, kind of the lines are drawn, there's the world and the church, and whatever was the soft center between the two, the cultural Christian, the, kind of the soft woke, that is kind of over, and it's church and world, two clear teams, pick what team you're on and no longer straddle the fence?
Well, yeah. Here's what I keep telling everybody, because I'm a big music guy. You had 80s hair metal band, guys that shaved against the grain and wore makeup and spandex. And then Kurt Cobain and the grunge movement started and pretty much just nullified all that. It actually became lame, to look like the hair metal band guys of the 80s. When Kurt Cobain showed up, he's like, I look like a middle-class lumberjack, and this is cool now. And I think what happened was people have been binging on this weird, seeker-sensitive, having these experiences that the first century church would walk into most churches and be like, what is this? This is embarrassing. And we did that for so long. And then the pastors lived in ambiguity where really they were trying to please man and not please God. And my hope is that this film just kind of is our version of the grunge movement, where it's like, I'm Kurt Cobain and my crew, and we're here with a completely different sound. And I'm sorry if you don't have a music career after this album comes out. And I say that in the most loving, redemptive way possible, because I don't think it's God canceling their ministries. I think it's him saying, would you get in alignment with what, can we retrace some ancient paths and go back to what this thing used to be before Constantine took over and the rest of that. So, my hope is that for all of our faults and failures, everybody in this film, we're really provoking some of these guys to stand for something and to step up and return back to their first love instead of being a denominational hireling.
So why do you think it is? You love pastors, I love pastors, but man, why is it that there's just a lot of cowards? They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get fired. They don't want to get a nasty email. They don't want the donors to get upset. It's like they're so horizontal that they failed to live vertical.
Yeah.
They're so busy looking out at what could happen if they do their job, they don't look up to the one who actually tells them what the job is. Why do you think that is? And we've seen that in recent years with, I think there's a whole generational apostasy. That's why I think that the timing of what you're trying to do is significant. There's a whole woke apostate denying of what is historic, essential Christian beliefs. And a lot of it comes down to gender and genitalia. It just literally comes down to the sexual ideation issue. Why do you think that is? And in New York, you kind of live in the future. What is it like there? And if it rolls out from New York to the rest of America over time, what are they in store for if they don't kind of shore up the base right now?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's complex, but I'm going to try to give a very simple answer based on my observations living here, like you said, in the proverbial future.
You're in
I think it's
Gotham in the
rooted,
future, yeah.
yeah. I think it's rooted a lot in fatherlessness. I think that's a major, it's either a perversion of the image of father or it's the lack of a father altogether. I mean, a lot of the guys who identified as drag queens and they were on the spectrum in the alphabet community, and then they joined our church and went through a process of freedom and discipleship. Many of them are now literally married with kids. The root of it was either fatherlessness or some distorted, broken view of a father. And so, for me, that's kind of, especially in our culture, it's like I was raised by a single mother. And my dad, unfortunately, committed manslaughter. He went to prison, got out of prison, started a whole new family, and then died prematurely. So that was that orphan spirit, that father wound was really at the root of a lot of my own rebellion. Even as a Christian, I was incredibly destructive. I was a heresy hunter. So whenever I call those people out, I'm like, man, I know your whole playbook because I lived it, because I was just raging against, the entire machine. And I think a lot of it's rooted in the orphan spirit, and you see it in fatherlessness. So, it's when men take their rightful place. That's why for you to, at the beginning of this conversation, reference my dynamic with my children, it's like when you have to be something you've never seen, it's really, really difficult. So a lot of what I do in New York is, okay, it's 3 steps. You need to receive God as Father and understand what that means, including discipline. Then you need to receive a human as a representative or a delegate. Just like Paul said, you have many teachers. I'm telling these New Yorkers, hey, you have many YouTube subscriptions. You follow a lot of people on Instagram, but you don't have a father. You're not accountable to anybody. You don't serve anybody like a son would serve a house. So you need a human delegate. And then if you're a man, you need to become one. And that's either spiritual, or Lord willing, physically and biologically. And so a lot of the ministry I do flows from that place. And so I'm not doing conversion therapy. The gospel does the transformation that I can't do. But then when I'm discipling people, I'm dealing with those issues of father. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is rooted in that dysfunction.
So let me pivot the conversation there. I like to say, before you get to your blessing, you got to go through your beating. And most guys want to get to the blessing. They don't want to go through the beating. It's like, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Like he had to get through the beating to get to the joy, the blessing. What are the biggest things in your life that have just punched you in the face? And how did you get through those to the place now where you've got a beautiful family, you've got a great church, you're releasing, a first-rate movie, and a lot of people would be like, man, I would like to, that's the life I would like. What were all the punches in the face to get to the finish line?
Yeah. It's so crazy having this conversation with you because I literally found your ministry over a decade and a half ago while I was going through the height of that beating. One of the things that attracted me to your writings and to your sermons really was you speaking into that, the pain inflicted by the beatdown. For me, it was all rooted in fatherlessness. So it's like my dad, leaves, goes to prison, comes back, dies prematurely.
How old were you when your dad went to prison?
I was four turning 5 years old.
So you remember him, but you don't know him well. How many kids were in your family at the time?
Yeah, so I eventually became the oldest of 5, but all like step siblings. So I'm the only product of my mom and dad.
So you're feeling you're a 4 or 5-year-old boy, dad's gone, you love your mom, you're concerned about her as a young boy, even if your mom doesn't put it on you, you're taking on man-sized responsibilities, at least you're feeling that burden.
Oh, well, yeah, not only that, but then my mom, who's repeating this cycle of abuse and trauma from her past, literally gets married multiple times after that to really toxic, abusive guys. So, who are just pummeling me emotionally, physically, mentally. So I'm literally getting beat down by every guy that comes into the home, and I'm the oldest. Finally, that all culminates to me being a teenager, and the last guy left and never came back. And I physically stepped up and worked multiple jobs to help pay bills and things like that. And so, I had this deep orphan wound, this thing. And then, as a result of that, this self-reliance, because I'm like, the only time life is ever good is when I take complete and total control. And then I have to deal with all that. And so then, for me, we had this myth in America. Some people who are old enough will remember that if you go to college and you graduate college, you'll come out on the other side and you'll have a good life.
No, you'll have a giant debt and you'll be wondering what your pronoun is.
Exactly. So that's what happened to me. I go to a Big Ten university. My first professor is the cliche biology professor who says God doesn't exist, and I'm going to prove to you over the course of the school year why. I come from, both sides of my family are just poor degenerates. So I'm thinking, oh, Christian people are ignorant and therefore they believe in God. Higher IQ people don't believe in God, like my professor. So I go into atheism. So it's just messed up, and dealing with all the trauma from my past. So, and then thankfully, my junior year of college, I end up, and I'm saying this in air quotes, randomly moving into a house with an Ivy League educated theologian named Lamont King Black, one of the funniest names ever. So shout out Lamont if you're watching right now. And then he just systematically destroys every single stronghold, every stupid belief I had. And that all culminated to me really surrendering my life to Christ. And then I met my wife shortly after that. We got married when I graduated from college. But, it's like you can be saved but be in chains, because I never dealt with any of this stuff. So now all of a sudden, I'm trying to give you the 3-minute version.
No, it's go. No, this is good. It's helpful. Because I think your story, there's going to be probably the majority of young men are going to be like, that sounds familiar. I didn't grow up in the Christian subculture with a present, healthy father in a non-anxious presence in the home. I mean, most guys, to them, father's a bad word, and a guy walking into a room is the worst case scenario.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's what it was for me. And, my mom had accepted Christ at some point in my childhood and kind of subjected us to church experiences, but I didn't feel anything. I didn't engage with it. I had fallen in love with scripture as a kid. This is pre-internet days. So I would read Encyclopedia Britannicas and the Bible, and I fell in love with scriptures. And I kind of had a supernatural experience as a teenager at one point. But then again, I go to college and all this natural, thinking. And I started getting programmed at that point, that was like early days woke,
Yeah, it was politically correct culture on campus and the
Yeah.
beginning of kind of speech regard and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is now like 25 years ago, this time I'm talking about. So it was like early days woke, really the seedbed for what we're living in now. And I was subjected to that stuff and victimized by it. Thankfully, God sovereignly moves me into this house with this Ivy League educated theologian, because I'm like, wait a second, smart people believe in God too. It's not just hillbillies in Indiana where I'm from. So that was kind of how that started. But then I now marry my wife, Julie. We have our first kid. I get ordained in ministry a couple years after that, and I'm new. And then, that's when I get news. My dad died. I got triggered by even having my first daughter, because I'm holding her, feeling this love I've never felt in my life, realizing that my biological father never felt that for me. At least that was my perception. So I'm falling apart. Then my pastor ends up having an infidelity. So it's like my whole world starts
Your
eroding
spiritual
around me.
father, yeah, your spiritual father pulls a grenade and then swallows it,
Yeah.
So at that point, how old were you when your dad died?
I was in my early 20s.
Okay, and were you a father at the time?
Yeah.
And so did you get any closure with that, or just
No. None whatsoever. And because my dad had started a new life, I didn't even get invited to the funeral. I found
oh
out
wow.
after it happened. So it's like, and simultaneously, my pastor ends up blowing up the ministry. So it's like, I have no spiritual father. My biological father's dead. I'm trying to be a dad. At the same time, I'm fighting with Julie on a daily basis because I'm spiraling out of control. And, it was a really dark, dark time.
So you would have been a first round draft choice to be a deconstructionist.
Yeah. Yes.
Start as an
Absolutely.
atheist, try Christianity. Dad doesn't get saved. Life doesn't end happily ever after. Family doesn't get reunited. Pastor commits adultery and self destructs. life doesn't come together, and pastor is the spiritual father is a massive disappointment. So in that, if an orphan spirit comes and a father wound in any degree of bitterness lingers in there, you're a deconstructionist. You're progressive. You're one of the red letter apostates. You're one of the guys who thinks that the Sermon on the Mount is the only part of the Bible that makes sense. And so, what keeps you from that? And you end up like, no, I'm going to be a father. I'm going to be a spiritual father. I'm going to try to help young men get delivered, and I'm not going to go apostate. I'm going to go, double down on the gospel and ministry. Why did you end up, how did you end up there? Because right now, most guys, they're just bitter and angry and jaded. And we're of the age where we've seen guys kiss dating, Jesus, heterosexuality, America, and their wife goodbye. Why didn't you end up there?
Yeah, this is crazy to actually be able to tell you this like on your broadcast. And so here's what happened. I was raised in like a charismatic Pentecostal environment. And a lot of, if you boil down like charismatic or Pentecostal, a lot of it is how do you escape pain? If you declare this, if you pray this way, your life will get better. You'll escape pain. So then when you start experiencing pain that's inescapable, you don't have a theology for that because you're like, I've decreed, I've declared, I've prayed all this stuff. I've done everything you've told me to do. It's not getting better. And cue Mark Driscoll. And I'm not kidding. It's kind of cool to be able to say this to you on the
I didn't know
broadcast.
we were going to get here, but okay.
Never knew. And so you said something one time in a sermon where you essentially said, suffer well. And it was this concept of, as a man, you have to learn how to suffer well, like get good at suffering. Up into that point, my entire paradigm from, Pentecostalism was how do you pray the suffering away? How do you live a certain way? So when that switched something in me, I'm telling you, it was a massive shift where when you were basically scream preaching, you need to learn how to suffer well. I was like, okay, that's the difference between me and my dad. When my dad experienced suffering, he drank, he beat my mom. He basically wasn't good at suffering. It was like I had a light bulb moment. It was like a major epiphany of like, wait a second, I might die like my dad, but I'm not going to live like him. And I remember just literally getting down on my knees and saying, my wife may never accept me back because at this point I'm blowing up my whole life. And I'm like, but I'm going to live the rest of my days and I'm going to become the Christian that learns how to suffer well. So I called Julie up and I'm like, Julie, I want to work on our marriage. I'll go to marriage counseling every week. I want to be that dad. I don't even care about ministry anymore. At that point, I had stepped out of ministry willfully because I just was falling apart. And I said, I just want to learn how to suffer well. And you were really the initiator of that mindset. And so that really was the shift. I'm like that. And I think that's what it's like a lot of this, again, going back to what I said about the seeker sensitive, it's like, how comfortable can we make our guests? You have your favorite drink and a bagel. How comfortable how can I preach this in such a way that, you can choke this thing down? When I think Jesus literally was like, yeah, drink my blood and eat my flesh. And people are like, this is crazy. And they leave. And I tell people all the time, we hit fastest growing church in America like the last 5 years in a row, that category. And I'm like, a lot of pastors are trying to grow their church and I'm trying to shrink it down to the real ones because it's a narrow path. And it wasn't until you really were the first person that I ever heard preach that way. But that was the anecdote to a lot of that stuff I was going through. And I'm like, you know what? I might not get a spiritual father. Robert Morris might not call me up. I got to learn how to suffer well right now. It was like that mindset. It to me is like anti-deconstruction, because deconstruction is really very much based on I'm a victim. That's really what it comes down to. And suffer well is kind of like, you're like this. There's no sugar with this medicine. Choke it down. But it'll cure you.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Tozer said, if God wants to use a man mightily, he needs to wound him deeply. And I was reading a study of athletes, and those who are world class, generally speaking, whether it be politicians, athletes, leaders of various sorts or kinds, what most of them have in common is they've been through brokenness, trauma, and real deep pain. And for some, they just quit. For others, they just use it as I'm a victim, and this becomes their identity for the rest of their life. And they vote for socialists, and they want checks to just show up in the mail from the government. And then other people, they fight through it, and then their training is in their trauma. And ultimately, there is no way to become a leader unless you're able to endure pain well, suffer well, and then lead others to do the same. Because if all you have is an escapist theology, and that is when hard times come, we cast we tell the demon to leave, and we know that the world is going to get dark, but we're going to get raptured. So at the end of the day, we're sort of insulated from reality, and if we have enough faith, then we can make the problems go away. And so within that, for you, what you went through could have made you a guy who didn't want to be married, didn't want to have kids. I mean, there's a whole generation of guys right now that aren't even getting married, and they're not having kids because they didn't like the way their dad was, and they don't want to even take the risk of getting married, taking on that responsibility, and maybe failing. So what compelled you to be like, no, I'm going to work on my marriage, and I want to be a good dad, and I'm not going to live in the shadow of my dad. I'm going to leave my father, and I'm going to go start a new legacy and be the first link in the chain, and we're going to do something different. What was the process behind all of that? Because that's what a lot of guys need to do.
Yeah.
They need to do like Abraham did and leave their father, and they need to go somewhere else, and they need to be the first link in the chain.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, so the first Adam fails. So then Christ comes back as the second Adam. He didn't come back as a dinosaur or a cheetah. It's like he came back as the second Adam, because whatever hurts you has the power to heal you, and it becomes a conduit. Like if you experience church hurt, the worst thing you can do is avoid church. I mean, even secular psychiatrists understand, like if you're triggered by dogs, the best thing for you is to experience. They'll even graduate you up.
You need to become a dog walker. That's what you need to do.
Literally. I mean, and I've studied this stuff. It's like they start off with the plush dogs, and then they graduate you all the way to a puppy, and then a full-blown pit bull. And guess what? You're cured. It's avoidance doesn't cure it. And so it's like, again, the first Adam fell, so the second Adam comes to redeem. So if you were hurt by a pastor, you're going to be healed by another pastor. If you were hurt by a man, you're going to be healed by another man. That's God's plan. Once that clicked in, it was like, oh, actually being the father I never had becomes a conduit for healing for me. And I get to right the wrong. And not only that, it's funny, my wife really encouraged me during the pandemic. You need to go live on the internet. I was like, Julie, I'm an old school pastor. I'm not an influencer. I'm not one of those cringy, hey guys, what's up? And my wife's like, yeah, that's why.
Wait a minute. What shoes are you wearing right now?
Okay, hold on. I'm shoeless. I'm in my office.
So you may be an influencer because you got to be very hip to just go barefoot in New York, bro. There's not enough hand sanitizer to fix those feet. I mean, that's how you know who the influencers are. You look at their footwear. So you're barefoot. I'm very conflicted.
I'm wondering if we got a second camera angle running because you just prophetically busted me out. Well,
that's a Kanye move, man. That's just very eccentric,
Yeah. Well, it's like here, the cringy influencer guys. And so I was
Frosted
like telling my
tips.
wife, I'm not going to.
Yeah, no, I know those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm kind of old school, but my wife, she was right. I went live on Facebook. I didn't know anything about social media, and I just started going viral like on a daily basis during the pandemic. I'd end a live stream, there'd be 250,000 views before I even ended it. It was bananas. My point in saying that, though, is the comment section. Somebody in the comment section one day called me Papa Sigs, and then it just took off. And then on a daily basis, everybody's logging in during the pandemic being like, hey, it's Papa Sigs. And at first I'm like, are they disrespecting me? What is this? And then, it was funny because my biological father, the short time I did know him, I called him Papa. And so now, fast forward, I'm in a global pandemic, just trying to serve people by faithfully teaching the scriptures to them via live stream. And organically, they start calling me Papa Sigs. And I shut that live stream off a couple days in after I realized I'm not getting rid of this name, and actually cried because I was like, wow, God, this is my greatest area of woundedness. And now I've become sort of this father figure in a scary time for a lot of people. And I was being a voice of reason, saying we're not going to accept this fear, and we're not going to bend our knee to this agenda. And all these people globally are calling me Papa Sigs. So I just think that's, for me, it was like, I'm just going to be the thing that I needed desperately. Because I think wherever there's pain, there's purpose. Wherever there's perversion, there's purpose. And it's just the devil always overplays his hand, you know? So it's like he's attacking the area of greatest purpose. And once I unlocked that, I was like, okay, that's my calling. That's what I'm supposed to do.
How old are you now, buddy?
40.
40. Oh, that's an amazing age in the Bible. You're a young man. So what Paul tells Timothy, don't let anybody look down on you because you're young. 40 is where you go from young man to grown man, is right at 40. And so you're just entering into that transition from big brother to father. And, you know, your ministry online is probably very young, and a lot of guys. What's really weird, you're just entering into that age where you're old enough to be their father.
Wow.
And man, that is a magical season and opportunity. And, you know, for those guys that are, 40 plus, I'll be 53 here shortly. There is a desperate need for guys who are 40 plus to think like fathers, to live like fathers, to act like fathers. And what we've both seen is some guys self-destruct before they get there.
Yeah.
And other guys, I'm at the age now where we've got 5 kids, 3 are married, 2 have got a child. I've got a kid in college, 1 kid left in high school. He's a senior. So we're about ready to be, empty nest and just kind of pivot into grandparents, which is amazing. And Grace and I have been faithfully married for 31 years. But what we're seeing at our age, a lot of Christian couples and even ministry couples and pastoral couples that are around our age, as soon as the kids begin to launch, the marriage implodes.
Wow.
Adultery, emotional affair, whatever the case may be. And I think it's because either the ministry or the children was like the glue that bonded the couple together. Once the kids left, the glue was gone and the marriage imploded. And so we're seeing a whole generation of guys who should be entering into their power years of being most helpful. Like when you got little kids at home, like you're busy. Once your kids kind of launch, if you're a grown man, you should have more time, energy, and margin to pull the young guys up and to be helpful. But if you're self-destructing, we're losing the handful of fathers that we do have. We don't have enough fathers, and a lot of them are blowing their life up at the season where they could be the most helpful.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so you entering into those years of a father, I think, so I'll just say this. I believe that there's a whole generation of young guys who love Jesus because they identify with the brother who gets assaulted.
Yeah.
And they really struggle with the father. And I think that's a lot of progressive, woke, apostate Christianity that you mentioned, that even the concept of God as Father is profoundly troubling. But Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. And I believe that you're saved by Jesus, but you're healed by the Father.
Wow.
And I believe until you get from Jesus to the Father, you're always going to act and operate and think either like an orphan, probably like an orphan. And until you get to know the Father, you're not going to really become a son, and you're never going to be ready to really become a physical or a spiritual father. And so I don't know why I feel like I'm supposed to tell you this. I think you're on the precipice of the most significant ministry of your life and the biggest impact. And I think the next 15 to 20 years are going to supersede everything you've done before this, because you're not going to self-destruct. You've got a great wife, and the father that you needed by God's grace is the father that you have become physically for your family. And it's the kind of father that is needed spiritually. And I think God's going to give you a whole generation of sons to raise up. and you're going to be faithful to your wife, and you're going to be faithful to the gospel. You're going to run your race, and you're going to see your finish line, my friend. I believe that's a prophetic word for you.
Oh man, you're wrecking me live on film. So when you said 15 to 20 years, no one on both sides of my family, no male has ever made it that far biologically. And there's just premature death on both sides, which I think contributes. And so when I say I'm going first, I mean, I literally am stepping in. So to think about the fact that God threaded you into my story in my 20s, that you were an impetus for me shifting out of, like you said, what could have been a woke apostate train wreck, suffer well. Then all of a sudden, now with this next season of my life, 20 years pass and you're back into my life, but I have the privilege of kind of kicking it with you right now. And then you're going to give me that prophetic word for the next 20 years. It's serendipitous, and it's a high calling. It's a great responsibility, but it's like just saying yes got me this far, and I think there's a reliance on the gospel. And if somebody's listening right now and they're like, well, how, it just feels overwhelming to be a good husband. It feels overwhelming to be a good father. I think, of course, we can't do it. That's to me, that is the gospel, and that's how God gets the glory out of any leader, it's our own human frailty and saying, well, look at Mike. He was trained how to be a demonic dad. He was trained how to be a toxic, abusive husband, but he's living out the opposite. And that's how God receives the glory, And so thank you so much for taking the time to drop that on me. I really appreciate it.
No, I love you, buddy, and I didn't know we were going to end up there, but I'll just close with this. I think God wants you to think bigger and longer than you were planning.
Man.
And I think as it grows, I just want to give you this word. A lot of people are going to want to come around you. They're going to want to be your friend, be your partner. Your escalator is going to be going up, and they're going to want to get on your escalator. The best wise counsel, the best advice, the best decision-making is going to come with you, your wife, and your children.
Yeah.
They are going to know you, your heart, your ministry, your calling better than anyone. And everyone else will have mixed motives, but I saw your wife and I saw your kids. Their motives are pure. And if you just stay very close to them and you run all the big decisions by them and you do what is best for them, this will go bigger and longer than you were expecting.
Wow. I'm wrecked. Thank you so much. I felt like you just locked something in. Just so much clarity in that. And from, like, as you know, the stuff that we're trying to endeavor to do with our lives and lead, it can be daunting, but there's such a simplicity in that and such a biblical accuracy, So thank you. I just feel peace all over me about that. And by the way, and there's no way you could have known this, but you were actually saying legitimate phrases that I said this morning back to me right now. So I just want to affirm that. Deadly accurate. Thank you.
Cool. I love you. Tell your family I said hi. We'll leave it there. I'm too old to know how you're supposed to end a podcast. Goodbye.
Mic drop. I'll see ya.